The Sorrow of Soesero. Once upon a time, not so long ago, there was a puppet maker named Gepetto. What's that? You say you've already heard this story? Really? About a little wooden puppet named Soesero. Oh, well, there you go. You were thinking of Pinocchio. Well, of course, such a great puppet maker as Gepetto, one who is able to bring life to his puppets, would never create only one puppet. So let me tell you the story about Gepetto and his little girl puppet, Soesero. As I was saying, once upon a time, not so long ago, there was a puppet maker named Gepetto. Gepetto was a very special puppet maker with a very special gift. He created his puppets with such attention to detail, such love and care, that each one he created was unique and individual. So unique, in fact, so individual in truth, that each one took on a life of its own. That is, they quite literally began to move and live and emote just as if they were real people. They would sing and dance, they would fight and play. Sometimes they would even help Gepetto while he worked on his next puppet. While Gepetto was delighted at this turn of events, the other puppet makers were not quite so sanguine about such behaviors. Roletto, another toy maker just a few houses down, frowned upon such impropriety and made sure everyone knew it. "Puppets have to be controlled," he said. "Nothing but trouble can come from letting puppets choose their own movements. That Gepetto is trouble for all of us, letting his puppets run willy-nilly, doing anything they desire. He's not creating puppets, he's creating a race of monsters. If we don't stop him, soon the whole world will be overrun by his monster puppets." Fortunately for Gepetto and his creations, Roletto was known for his drama, and while Gepetto was regarded as a bit of an odd duck in the village, few really believed Roletto's monster race theory. Still, people steered a wide berth around Gepetto's house, and when one day he disappeared while searching for a particularly troublesome puppet named Pinocchio, no one really seemed too concerned. In fact, many of the villagers seemed relieved when it began to appear he wasn't coming back. Being inside a fish from which he had not yet escaped, Gepetto also wondered if he would be coming back. It's likely that had it not been for the other puppets who took care of Gepetto's little house while he was gone, it likely would have been claimed by the village and Gepetto's things ransomed off. Still, the day came when Gepetto did return, bringing a little boy with him, a little boy who oddly resembled the Pinocchio puppet. But that's the story you've heard, and I wanted to tell you about Soesero. Come to think of it, though, Pinocchio does play a part in this story. A very important, if somewhat tragic part. But that you shall see in the proper course of the story. When Pinocchio was still just a puppet, when his ornery and rebellious streak was just beginning to emerge, Gepetto finished his first female puppet, Soesero. Soesero was beautiful. She had twinkling marble eyes and a complexion of such finely polished wood that she appeared to be glass. Her hair was not yarn, but a finely spun thread of golden cotton, which fell gracefully around her perfectly detailed ears. When she was wonderfully formed, Gepetto placed in her the final piece. He wanted her to have a fiercely independent spirit, and he balanced that with an equally passionate sense of loyalty. It was part of Gepetto's gift that he was able to provide his puppets with such intangible things as these. He would place these things, which in fact made up the individuality, the self of each puppet, inside a special jewel. Every one of Gepetto's puppets had such a part, which he placed inside the trunk of the puppet, right where one would find a heart in you or me. It was these that made each puppet unique. It was this that made them alive. For Soesero it was emerald green, reminiscent of life and vitality, and into this jewel he placed the spirit of independence, the nobility of loyalty, and a million other things besides. As with all his puppets, he provided her with strings. Even though Gepetto did not force control on his puppets, he always gave them the strings which only he could manipulate. If the puppet chose, Gepetto would pull a little on a string, and the puppet would respond with its own energy and choose to follow that gentle pull. In fact, he discovered that most of the puppets found great joy when he and they worked together in tandem. The puppets loved to dance, and it turned out that some of the best dances could only be done with Gepetto's help. Certain other activities were also best when Gepetto was there, string in hand. Some of Gepetto's happiest moments, and truly the puppets as well, would be when they willingly asked him to take the strings and help them perform complicated dances of joy. At first, Pinocchio enjoyed this dance as much as any of the puppets, but about the time of Soesero's birth, he began less and less frequently to ask for Gepetto's help on the movements. He began to theorize that he could learn to dance even the great dances without Gepetto. To be fair, this idea started as a desire to please Gepetto. Perhaps, thought Pinocchio, I could create a new dance, one that I can do alone, and then show it to Gepetto as my gift to him. Won't he be happy to see what I have done for him? Soesero, on the other hand, seemed to take constant delight in dancing with Gepetto. Gepetto, for his part, always enjoyed dancing with his puppets, and had even devised a special tool by which he could control the strings for all the puppets at once, so he never had to refuse any puppet who wished to dance. Soesero, furthermore, because of her beauty and unique place as the first girl puppet, was a favorite of the other puppets. Therefore, whenever she danced with Gepetto, many of the others would choose to dance as well. Only Pinocchio, who was still working on his own dance, refused to dance with her. Still, Gepetto noticed he always watched, and smiling to himself speculated that Pinocchio was in love with Soesero. Perhaps, thought Gepetto, she will teach him once again to dance with me. Sadly, though, Gepetto was wrong. Pinocchio did not love Soesero. Actually, he believed he did, but what he did not realize was that it was only during the dance with the puppet maker that the puppet learns the nobler emotions. It was as if Gepetto passed through the strings not only the signals for the movements which the puppets followed, but a piece of himself as well. Pinocchio had not danced for a very long time. He had not let Gepetto touch his strings for many days. Consequently, Pinocchio did not love Soesero, because he had forgotten what love was. Nonetheless, he did admire the way she danced, and as he watched, he longed to make her dance like that for him. He was surprised at this urge, and yet it seemed somehow right for him to think this way. After all, he thought, as he watched Gepetto lead Soesero in a particularly stunning leap and spin, why should I not control some other strings? Why should I not be like Gepetto? No one pulls his strings, do they? No puppet had ever thought this way before. Gepetto had strictly forbidden any puppet to touch another's strings. This idea of Pinocchio being able to control Soesero in this way was in fact preposterous. Only Gepetto was large enough for such an act. Indeed, even as he thought it, Pinocchio decided what he really wanted was not to make Soesero dance, but just to dance himself. Almost he approached Gepetto. Almost he asked him to take the strings and lead him once again in the dance. Almost. But no. So much time had passed. His recent attempts at dancing by himself had in fact proved disastrous. Pinocchio was sure he would only make a fool of himself with Gepetto, and that he could not bear to do. No, first he must perfect his own dance. Then he would unveil it for Gepetto, just as he'd planned. Having decided this again, he returned to watching Soesero. Her hair fell in graceful curls around her face as she danced. Her eyes twinkled in joy, and she moved with a freedom that only the puppet under Gepetto's skillful hands ever experienced. Troubled by his own thoughts, Pinocchio turned and climbed upon his shelf to sleep. The night was darker than usual when it happened. Pinocchio lay awake, listening to the other puppets breathe, listening to Gepetto shuffle around the shop. What was he doing? Working on a new puppet? Planning a new version of the dance to surprise the other puppets with? Maybe just getting ready for bed. Despite the oppression and totality of the darkness, Pinocchio was comforted just to hear the puppet maker moving in the darkness. Somehow he knew as long as he could hear Gepetto, things would be all right. Sighing, Pinocchio fell asleep. Pinocchio danced. Magically, incredibly, he danced. More accurately, he flew, he soared, he swooped. He looked up and saw no strings, no Gepetto guiding his movements. Bursting into laughter, he looked down, and to his surprise, in his hand were strings, Soesero's strings. As he soared and danced, he pulled her strings, and she followed along. Were her eyes twinkling as they had for Gepetto? Or were those tears? The night was still dark when he next awoke. Even the embers in the fireplace across the room from the puppet shelf on which he lay were dark. It was also completely quiet. Pinocchio could no longer hear Gepetto moving about. Had he gone to sleep? The dream still fresh in his mind, still giddy from the flight, Pinocchio quietly climbed down from the shelf. He lowered himself quietly to the shelf below, and there, sleeping, lay Soesero. He gazed at her hair, and then shifting his stare, stood transfixed by the string coming up from her head, from her arms, from her legs. Trembling, he reached for the strings. Tentatively, he took them in his hand, and then what was intended to be a gentle move, he pulled the strings towards him. Soesero jerked out of bed and in his direction. Her eyes flew open, and Pinocchio saw a look of confusion and fear. She swung out towards him much faster and harder than he thought should have been the case from his gentle pull. Spinning to the side, he fought to stay on the shelf. Soesero swung over the edge of the shelf and hung there dangling from the strings in Pinocchio's hand. Leaning as far back as he could, Pinocchio struggled not to let her fall. It was all wrong. Suddenly it was all wrong. It wasn't supposed to be this way. He suddenly knew with clarity he could not handle this. He should not be holding her strings this way. It wasn't so much that she was as heavy and big as he was. That he had expected. It was the sensitivity of the strings. Every twitch, every thought of movement even, that Pinocchio had seemed to travel down the strings and into Soesero. He had completely underestimated the power of this position. Instead of exhilarating him, it frightened him. He didn't want to be doing this, yet there she was, dangling, jerking an odd, graceless dance. She stared blankly across the space, saying nothing, but looking extremely frightened. He had to get her back over the safety of the shelf, but he was extremely reluctant to pull the strings again. Soesero couldn't figure out what was going on. She had never known such emotions before. Terrified, ashamed, angry, and sad all at the same time. She didn't know what Pinocchio's plans were, how long and how far he intended to take this dance. She knew she just wanted it to stop, to be back in her own bed, back in control. She wanted to speak, to scream, to tell Pinocchio to stop, but somehow wasn't even able to do that. She never could tell exactly what happened next. Several things, actually. It seemed that Gepetto came in at the same time that Pinocchio, whether intentionally or not, Soesero couldn't tell, let go of the strings. Soesero fell. If this were the Pinocchio story, you would next hear about his running from Gepetto. His shame at his actions were so great that even he could not face them. He chose instead to deny it ever happened. One could not do such constant lying to Gepetto, who seemed to know the truth. So Pinocchio fled to an island called Pleasure Island. The rest of the story you might know from the corrupted version distributed by children's publishers and movie studios. You can imagine Pinocchio's surprise when Gepetto actually sought after and retrieved this wicked puppet, still loving him in spite of his wickedness. But this is not Pinocchio's story. This is Soesero's. Poor Soesero. In the weeks that followed, Soesero only danced with Gepetto once. She wanted to, of course, but in the fall, Soesero had broken one of her legs. Gepetto, of course, had fixed it. She had woken after the fall to find Gepetto's gentle work repairing the broken leg. As she woke, he had smiled at her and said, "I've taken care of the most significant damage. Did you know you had broken your leg too? Someday I'm going to find a way to give you a whole new body. Would you like that, Soesero? A new body? You and all the others. A body that will not break so easily, more like mine, and less like the frail puppets. But for now, as I say, I have taken care of the most significant damage, and now you will be able to dance again." Soesero was delighted at the prospect, and truth be told, also delighted to learn that Pinocchio had fled the village. She didn't know if Gepetto knew what had happened or not, but decided that in some way she hoped he didn't. Oddly, Pinocchio's indiscretion had made her feel sullied, as if his fingerprints on her strings would forever hinder Gepetto's movements through them. She felt strangely ashamed, as if it had been her fault, too. She couldn't really explain this feeling, but there it was. She had been controlled by another puppet, and had done nothing about it. Maybe if she had been smarter, more alert, told Pinocchio to stop, anything. But there it was. She was eager to dance with Gepetto, to discover if he could erase the dirt upon her strings. For the first week, though, she delayed, afraid perhaps that Gepetto wouldn't be able to cleanse the dirt. On the second week, Gepetto came to her. "Join us again in the dance, Soesero. Do you fear you are too damaged? As I told you, I have fixed the most significant damage. You will see. You are still able to dance." Shyly, which was unusual for Soesero before, she nodded her head. Gepetto smiled broadly and gently took the strings. Immediately Soesero knew it was okay. Gepetto guided the movements as well as ever, and Soesero knew the joy of the dance. Together they glided and soared, and Soesero almost felt whole and clean again. Almost. Just as the dance was nearing its pinnacle, Soesero tried to turn with Gepetto and found her leg did not follow. Instead of the graceful spin Gepetto had indicated, she made a clumsy sort of movement, which was not at all Gepetto's intention. Soesero looked down in surprise and discovered to her horror that her broken leg had not been completely repaired. It was no longer broken, true, but there was an uneven spot where the wood had been glued together. It was this uneven place which had gotten caught on a string. It had only been momentarily caught, and the dance had continued, but Soesero had been mortified and had asked Gepetto to cease the dance. He had done so, but had never seemed to even notice the mistake in the dance. Soesero went to her room, her head full of troubled thoughts, trying to understand what had happened, and why she felt so little like dancing ever again. Day after day, Gepetto would call her to the dance. Day after day, she refused. When he began to ask her why, she would only say she did not wish to. After all, many puppets like Pinocchio chose not to dance. Why shouldn't she? Once she tried to tell him why, all of the many reasons why, but she couldn't do it. First, Gepetto was clearly saddened by Pinocchio's disappearance. It would break his heart to know what Pinocchio had done. Second, how could she tell him that he had inadequately repaired her leg? That, too, would break his heart. How could he have inadequately repaired her leg? He had promised her, "I have repaired the most significant damage," and yet here she was, still damaged by the fall. Maybe she would just have to wait for the new bodies he had promised. Rumors had begun to circulate that in fact Gepetto had perfected a means of turning puppets into real children, and Soesero decided if this were so, then there was hope to dance again someday. She would just wait for the new body. Soesero began to be troubled by other things too, things she had never really noticed much before the fall. She noticed that many of the puppets were always fighting and being mean to each other. She even began to suspect that some puppets had followed in Pinocchio's footsteps and were trying to control the strings of other puppets. She began to see signs in others that reflected her own feelings of shame and despair. This did nothing to help her own sense of shame, but it did cause her to question Gepetto's wisdom in letting the puppets behave without strings. She began to think that maybe the other puppet makers were right. Perhaps it would have been better not to have allowed the puppets quite so much freedom. Once she never would have questioned Gepetto's wisdom, but he had missed that uneven spot on her leg. And so now she wondered about other things as well. At times, even though she didn't really believe it, she even found to her dismay that she questioned Gepetto's good intentions. Maybe it wasn't that he was just fallible. Maybe he hadn't cared enough to repair Soesero adequately. Maybe he'd been more worried about Pinocchio. That was another thing that bothered her, than about fixing her adequately. Most of the time, no, she just feared that if she danced, Gepetto would notice the injured leg and be reminded that she was damaged. And somehow that fear bothered her more than anything. So she rarely danced. She did try, now and then. Sometimes it would almost seem that everything was normal again as Gepetto would lead her through great and graceful moves. But then something would remind her again of who she was, of how she was damaged. She would falter. Embarrassed, she would slip away from Gepetto, and she would decide again not to dance until she had the new body. But she wanted to. In fact, so much did she want to dance that she strongly considered letting one of the other puppets control her strings, just so she could dance. She knew it wouldn't be as good, but it was something. When she thought about it, she realized how odd it was to desire the very thing that had damaged her in the first place. But there it was. What really began to scare her, though, was that she also found herself considering the idea of controlling other puppets' strings. Horrified at her own desires, she now realized the extent of her own shame. She increasingly began to avoid Gepetto altogether. She couldn't bear the thought of him seeing how truly shameful and damaged she was. She decided she would live with the loneliness and just keep waiting for the new body. Then she would be able to dance again. Then she would again be clean. The night was darker than usual when it happened. Soesero was lying awake, as she often did, listening to the other puppets breathe. She softly ran her hand over the uneven spot on her leg, thinking about that horrible night when it happened. She wondered how long it would take Gepetto to perfect the new bodies, and if she could make it without dancing until then. All her questions began to flourish again, and she began to cry softly. Soesero. Soesero tried to stifle the crying in surprise. Who is it? Soesero. It's me, Gepetto. And it was. He had come softly to her bedside, and now he spoke quietly in her ear. Beloved Soesero, how come you choose not to dance with me? Have you grown weary of the dance? Oh, Gepetto, no. It's just that... But once again the words failed her, and Soesero broke down in tears. Gepetto was silent for a moment, and Soesero wondered if he was angry. She dared not look at him, but something drove her to press on, to speak of that which she had avoided all the time. Gepetto, you said you repaired the most significant damage, but you didn't. I know you tried, but my leg is still injured. I cannot dance. Gepetto was silent, and Soesero wondered if he was really so mad at her words. But she still could not look. Gently Gepetto cupped her chin with his hand and tilted her face up to behold his own. She wondered that he did not use the strings, but this thought vanished when she saw his face. He was not angry. He was crying, weeping, just as she was. This emboldened her, and she went on. Oh, Gepetto, I know you didn't mean to, but see, right here on my leg, you missed this uneven spot. Sometimes it throws off the dance, but it's okay. I can just wait on the new body. That is, if you really are doing that. Gepetto shook his head, and Soesero's heart sank. There was not going to be a new body then. Little one, spoke Gepetto gently but clearly through the tears, such pain you have been facing. You do not have to wait for the new body. I did not miss the damage to the leg. I said I repaired the most significant damage, but you have misunderstood. In the fall, you not only broke your leg, but your jewel. It was cracked. Soesero looked at Gepetto in surprise. Her jewel? That special part of her which made her who she was? Now it made sense. Her damage was much greater than she thought. So I truly am ruined, Gepetto. But if it is more than my body, can you really fix that too? When I get a new body, I mean? Gepetto smiled in a funny, sad sort of way. That is what you do not understand, little Soesero. I told you I repaired the most significant damage. I gave you a brand new jewel. You are no longer the damaged Soesero you were. You are a brand new shining Soesero. You have been so ever since that first night. But, Gepetto, then why did you not fix my leg too? And why do I still feel so miserably damaged? I think you are very nice, Gepetto, but I fear you are wrong. I haven't been able to dance without embarrassment since the fall. So many questions, Soesero. I am sorry, Gepetto. I am not. I am glad you are finally asking them. And there are others too, aren't there? Oh, Gepetto, yes there are. Why do you let your puppets have such freedom? Do you not like freedom, Soesero? But Gepetto, you are too kind. You do not see what they do to each other. They are capable of such horrible things. Some even do what you strictly forbid. Yes, Soesero, I know. Like Pinocchio. You know? Yes. But then surely, Gepetto, you must stop making such puppets. You must not allow us to control our own actions. We only cause one another pain and ruin. You do not only cause pain and ruin. If I did that, you could never choose to dance with me. You would be no different from Roletto's puppets, dancing only if, when, and how I moved you. But Gepetto, maybe that would be better. Or perhaps you could give us a limited freedom, or protect us from making choices that affect other puppets. Soesero, limited freedom is no freedom at all, and choices without impact are no choices at all. I desire for you to trust me, to choose to walk and dance with me, always holding the strings, but I will not force it upon you. I have made you, and I know what will make you happiest, but I will not force such happiness even on you. I am not Roletto. I am Gepetto. I desire not puppets, but companions. But why did Pinocchio not choose you? Why did he do such an awful thing? Why does he forsake his own happiness and take mine at the same time? Little Soesero, I would that none of you would run from me, but there are many reasons you do. Fear, anger, shame? See, Pinocchio too was damaged. It's in your damaged nature to run from your created role as puppet. Pinocchio's damage was in his pride. He wanted to be the puppeteer. He has run, and I will not force him to return. But someday I will come to him, as I am to you, and I will try to help him understand as well. But Gepetto, who damaged Pinocchio? Was he treated as I was by someone else? Ah, little Soesero, it is not for me to share Pinocchio's story. But no, neither his damage nor yours came from another puppet. But the fall, his touching my strings, were horrible and inexcusable things. Yes, they damaged your leg and confused your understanding. But neither of these things damaged your jewel. But then, I don't understand. What? When? It's a long and difficult story, little one. But understand that every puppet here had a damaged jewel. It's a story of great history, which one day I will tell you. But it's a problem within the jewel itself. Each of you has a crack, tiny but certain, in your jewel. A crack which is beyond repair. It is the damage which encourages your rebellion, and your fear, and your anger. It is the damage which makes each of you by nature make the wrong choices instead of the right one, to dance with me. But, Gepetto, if it is our damaged nature to always run from you, then there is no hope. Or at least our only hope is when you give us new bodies. Is that it? Must we just wait for that time? Soesero, do you still not understand? I said I fixed the most significant damage. I left the uneven spot on your leg to remind you of your need for me and of your hope for a new body. But I did fix the most significant damage. You no longer hold the damaged jewel inside you. But you said the crack was beyond repair. Yes, it is. That is why I completely replaced the jewel. You are no longer the damaged Soesero. You are not even just a repaired Soesero. You are a brand new Soesero inside the old Soesero's body. The core of you is beautiful again, Soesero. Soesero's tears were falling quickly now. Rather from hope or despair, she still wasn't sure. But Gepetto, that can't be. Oh, I wish it were, but you don't know. I mean, if all this is true, then why do I feel so damaged? Why am I unable to dance? Because, beautiful child, the actions of Pinocchio have confused your mind, and the fall has damaged your body. But you are not your mind, and you are not your body. These things are not the magic of Gepetto. It is the jewel into which I placed you, the spirit of independence, the nobility of loyalty, and a million other things besides. But now there is no crack to make you less beautiful. I am not damaged? Soesero, you are not damaged, confused, and bruised, but not damaged, stained, blemished, or cracked. You are Soesero. You are my child. When you receive your new body, it will be easier to see, easier to believe. But do you trust me, child? Yes, Gepetto, I think I do. You may not always understand the things I do, but have I ever lied to you? No, Gepetto, you have not. Then hear me now, Soesero. Until you receive your new body, you must trust me that I have given you a new heart, a new jewel, a new self. The old one I threw into the fire, but the new one will live forever in this body and in the next. You will still feel pain and doubt. You will still wonder, but you must trust that I tell you the truth now. I do, Gepetto, I do, but how can I get past the confusion? I fear that sometimes I will still forget. You are wise, Soesero, to know that. Indeed, you will. But if you will dance with me again, you will find that over time, perhaps a long time, my truth will pass through the strings again to you. From me to you. That is how the truth will become clear to you again. From that time forward, Soesero continued to dance with Gepetto. She did not always like the dance. Sometimes she still stumbled, but she reminded herself that it was her body, not her jewel, that caused these stumbles, and she continued to dance. She found that sometimes when she wasn't willing to dance with Gepetto, that Gepetto would send other puppets who would remind her how good the dance was, that she was a beautiful new Soesero, and whatever else she needed reminding of, and then she would dance again. One day, Gepetto decided it was time to find Pinocchio and call him back as well, but, as I say, that's another story altogether. And now, children, it's time for bed.